A mountain range on Mars vanished without moving a single inch. That was the problem. For more than a century, trained astronomers pointed telescopes toward the southern edge of Mars and kept seeing the same impossible thing: bright white peaks rising beyond the polar ice cap, sharp ridges, jagged elevation, a massive, frozen mountain formation so visually obvious that experts across generations treated it as a real piece of Martian geography. Then cameras arrived, and the mountains disappeared completely. Not eroded, not hidden by weather, not changed by seasons. They had never existed at all. Which meant something far more disturbing had just happened. Some of the most experienced observers in astronomy had spent decades collectively seeing an entire landscape their own brains had invented. And suddenly, one of science's oldest assumptions became dangerous. The idea that trained human eyes could be trusted. It started in 1845 inside the observatory of American astronomer Ormsby McKnight Mitchel. Mitchell was not an amateur, making wild guesses through primitive lenses. He was one of the most respected observers of his generation, working during an era when astronomy still depended almost entirely on direct visual observation. You looked through the eyepiece, recorded what you saw, and built maps from repeated viewing. That night, Mars presented something strange. Near the southern polar cap, separated from the bright white ice region, Mitchell recorded a second detached luminous structure. It looked elevated, distinct, brilliant against the darker surface. Not a blur. Not an artifact. A separate physical object. He sketched it carefully onto a hand-drawn Martian globe. A bright white formation positioned beyond the expected boundary of the polar ice. The implication was immediate. Mars appeared to contain an enormous mountain range near its southern pole. And once that image existed, other astronomers started finding it too. That was where the danger began. Over the next several decades, observatories across Europe and America kept reporting variations of the same structure. Different telescopes, different observers, different weather conditions. Yet remarkably similar descriptions kept appearing in scientific records. A detached white formation rising near the Martian South Pole. The visual anchor remained consistent. The same sharp white peaks sketched again and again onto planetary maps. And repetition creates trust. Once enough independent experts confirm an observation, the observation stops feeling uncertain. It becomes reality. By the late 19th century, planetary cartographers had quietly accepted the feature as legitimate Martian geography. Mars had mountains. Large ones. Frozen ones. Possibly towering several miles high. But the mountain itself never changed. Something else did. Astronomers began building larger refractor telescopes with better optical precision, instruments capable of resolving finer planetary detail than anything Mitchell had used. And now, something uncomfortable started happening. The mountain became harder to see. Not invisible. Just inconsistent. Observers would report seeing the same brilliant white detached peak during one viewing session, then fail completely during another. Some blamed atmospheric distortion. Others blamed Martian weather patterns. Dust storms, seasonal frost migration, surface condensation. The safe explanation still worked. Until photography entered astronomy. And that changed what observation meant. For centuries, astronomy depended on a fragile assumption. Human vision was the final authority. If enough trained observers saw the same thing repeatedly, the observation was trustworthy. Early astrophotography introduced something entirely different. A witness without biology. No fatigue. No expectation. No subconscious pattern recognition. Just mechanical recording. And when photographic plates started capturing high-resolution images of Mars in the early 20th century, astronomers expected confirmation. Instead, they found emptiness. The same region Mitchel had drawn in 1845 showed nothing. No detached mountain. No elevated white peaks. No secondary formation. Only a smooth southern ice plain blending gradually into surrounding terrain. The hand-drawn Martian globe, covered in sharp, white, jagged peaks, had just collided with monochrome photographic evidence, showing flat, frozen nothingness. The first explanation worked, until it failed completely. At first, astronomers resisted. Surely the cameras were missing something. Maybe exposure timing erased contrast. Maybe the equipment lacked sufficient sensitivity. Maybe human eyes still outperformed machines under subtle conditions. So observatories kept checking. Again and again. More photographs. Better optics. Repeated imaging sessions under ideal conditions. And every new plate returned the same verdict. The mountain range did not exist. But this story had already become larger than Mars. Because now, astronomy faced a measurement crisis. The problem was no longer one mistaken observation in 1845. The problem was repeated confirmation. Multiple trained experts had independently seen the same non-existent geological structure over generations. That should have been impossible. Unless the error was not inside the telescope. Unless the observer was the problem. Researchers began studying a brutal truth about visual perception. Under high contrast conditions, especially near sharp brightness boundaries, the human visual cortex aggressively enhances edges. Bright regions bleed outward. Boundaries sharpen artificially. Small detached contrast zones can appear elevated. The eye begins manufacturing physical structure where none exists. Mars had not fooled astronomers. Their own biology had. And suddenly, the old method of planetary mapping looked fragile. Every hand-drawn planetary chart from previous centuries became suspect. How many lunar formations had been exaggerated? How many surface boundaries had been distorted? How many other worlds had been quietly reshaped by the architecture of human perception itself? The mountain on Mars had not disappeared. Its meaning had changed. That was worse. By the 1960s, increasingly advanced photographic surveys finally closed the case. The entire southern polar region appeared flat. Smooth, frozen terrain stretching exactly where generations of astronomers once saw enormous elevated peaks. The hand-drawn Martian globe dissolved permanently into sterile monochrome images, proving the mountain had never existed. And astronomy learned something terrifying before the space age had even begun. The eye is not an instrument. It is an interpreter. For centuries, humans believed looking carefully was enough. Mars proved otherwise. Sometimes the observer creates the world they think they see. The mountain vanished. Trust vanished with it. And science never looked the same again.